The wine. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
His voice cracked as crimson spilled across her white silk gown. The billionaire's chair scraped back, sharp as a blade across marble. The dining hall froze mid-breath. Every fork, every whisper, every heartbeat paused. Then came the murmur, low, vicious, rippling through linen and glass. "Waiter's finished," someone muttered. "She's going to destroy him." But she didn't move. Not yet. Her eyes, ice behind gold-rimmed lenses, locked on the sleeve of his uniform, where a faint Air Force insignia glimmered through the linen. The same emblem she'd seen years ago, on a medic's arm, under falling debris. Before I show you the exact moment when the room went silent, by the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Because what's happening here isn't just a mistake. It's the collision of two lives already linked by one forgotten act of courage. This isn't a story about spilled wine. It's about dignity confronting power. He stood still, napkin in hand, trembling only slightly, yet his face showed nothing. No panic, no plea. Around him, the club glittered with judgment. Glass chandeliers, polished cutlery, $1,000 laughter. But he'd lived through worse. The hush that followed reminded him of rotor blades dying out after a crash. Too quiet, too long. Elias Corrin didn't belong in places like this. He belonged to long nights and hospital lights, to the quiet hum of machines that kept his daughter alive. Waiting tables at the Halvier Club was supposed to be temporary, until the next surgery bill arrived. But tonight, the temporary felt permanent. The red stain on her gown had written it in bold. He reached for a towel, voice steady. "Ma'am, I'll cover the cleaning myself." No answer. She just stared, not at his face, but at that emblem. He remembered the day he stopped wearing his uniform proudly. The day command sent him home after the Aleph evacuation. Too many wounded, too much loss. He hadn't spoken of it since. Now, a woman who could buy the world was staring at the one thing he couldn't forget. The manager's shoes clicked across the marble. "You're done, Corrin," he hissed, eyes darting toward her table. "Apologize and leave quietly." But Elias didn't bow. "Let me finish the service," he said softly. His tone carried the same quiet authority he used once to calm a bleeding pilot. The manager blinked, thrown off by the calm. The billionaire finally spoke, voice low. "What did you say your name was?" "Elias, ma'am." Her gaze sharpened. The name fell like an echo she didn't expect to hear again. He folded the towel and stepped back. Every guest watched, waiting for the explosion that never came. Instead, she said only, "Sit down." The command landed strange in the air. Waiters didn't sit, not here, but Elias didn't argue. He stood his ground, eyes level, quiet. Something in his composure unsettled her, like looking into the eyes of someone who'd already seen everything that could break a person and decided not to flinch again. When she rose and left, murmurs followed her out the door. He just exhaled, slow and silent, and picked up the shattered glass. Later, when the tables cleared and lights dimmed, he clocked out. The rain outside met him halfway home, washing the scent of wine from his hands, but not the memory. At home, a soft beep welcomed him, the heart monitor by his daughter's bed. "Hey, champ," he whispered, kneeling beside her. 10 years old, pale but smiling, she reached up weakly. "You smell like grapes," she teased. He smiled, smoothing her hair. Occupational hazard. On the counter sat an unopened envelope. Another medical invoice, another month of fear disguised as numbers. He turned it over, unread. For now, her breathing mattered more. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse of glass and rain, Celeste Varon replayed the moment in her mind, the insignia, the calm, the name. She hadn't believed in coincidence in years. Now she couldn't stop. The wine had spilled, yes, but something else had cracked wider than the glass that night. A silence buried under memory, waiting for the next storm to break it open. The following morning, the city's gray light spilled across Elias's apartment, finding its way between the blinds and across the medical monitor by his daughter's bed. The machine's steady rhythm was a lullaby he both depended on and feared. Mira stirred as he checked her vitals, his hands gentle, precise. She smiled faintly. "You didn't sleep again." He managed a quiet grin. Someone had to keep the night shift going. He pretended calm, but his uniform hung over the chair like an accusation. By noon, his manager's words, "You're done, Corin," still pulsed in his head. At the kitchen counter, he spread out overdue bills like battle maps. Rent, medication, energy. The total read louder than any insult from last night. He'd been fired before, but this time the stakes were heavier. Without insurance from the job, Mira's next appointment would vanish from their calendar. He turned the papers over, hiding the red stamps. She didn't need to see them. Across town, Celeste Varon watched rain pattern the glass of her penthouse. Her assistant placed a file beside her untouched coffee. "The waiter from last night, you asked for background." The report was thin. Restaurant employment, military discharge, no misconduct. But the insignia image from a security feed made her pause. The same emblem worn by a medic who once dragged her out of a burning aircraft in Alyth 9 years ago. Her voice dropped. "Find out why he's serving tables." The assistant hesitated. "Ma'am, he was discharged after the rescue mission. Medical downsizing." Celeste nodded slowly. Her mind replayed the memory, the smoke, the chaos, the calm tone saying, "You're safe now." She hadn't forgotten. The voice only buried it under meetings and margins. Elias folded his uniform, careful with each crease. He had no backup job, only a quiet conviction that had kept him alive when everything else fell apart. The Halvir Club would replace him by dinner. People like him were easily replaced. People like her weren't. Still, something about her silence last night, the lack of fury, haunted him. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. The day slipped into dusk. He left a note on the fridge, went to find work. "Be good, Mira." Outside, drizzle turned to steady rain. Downtown lights blurred like watercolor as he walked toward a staffing agency, resume tucked under his arm. Halfway there, a sleek car slowed beside him. The tinted window lowered just enough for a voice to carry over the rain. "Mr. Corin," said the driver, a woman in a dark suit. "Miss Varon would like to speak with you." He hesitated. "About what?" She didn't say. He looked at the car, then at the puddles collecting in the street. "Tell her I appreciate it, but I'm busy staying unemployed tonight." He started walking again. The car idled, then followed slowly. "She only wants 5 minutes," the driver insisted. When Elias finally stopped, he wasn't thinking about pride. He was thinking about the medical bills waiting at home. He got in. The ride to the Varon Tower was silent except for wipers and distant thunder. In the elevator, mirrored walls reflected the man he'd become. Neat uniform gone, just a plain jacket and eyes that had seen too much. When the doors opened, she was waiting by the window, skyline behind her like a kingdom of light. "You didn't have to come," she said, not looking at him. "I almost didn't," he replied. Her lips twitched. "You were at Alyth Base." It wasn't a question. He said nothing. "You saved 6 people from that wreckage," she continued, "including me." "I was part of a team," he corrected gently. You carried me through the fire." The words hung between them like smoke. She finally turned, eyes searching his. "What happened after that mission?" He exhaled. "Budget cuts. Medical staff downsized. They said I'd done enough. And now you serve wine." He smiled faintly. "Life has a sense of humor." Her gaze softened. "I owe you more than an apology." "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Last night was an accident. You could have humiliated me. You didn't." Celeste shook her head. "Maybe I should have. It would have been easier." She gestured toward the rain. "I'm leaving tonight for the coast, board meeting at the airfield. I want you to have this." She handed him an envelope. Compensation, perhaps. He didn't open it. "You didn't call me here for charity." Her voice lowered. "No, for conscience." He left without taking the envelope. In the elevator, he closed his eyes, feeling the hum of motion beneath his feet. Somewhere, thunder rolled closer. The city's pulse quickened. Something unseen was building. Back at home, Mira slept peacefully, unaware her father's world had shifted again. On the nightstand lay her bracelet monitor, blinking steady green. He sat beside her, holding the small device as though it tethered him to purpose. Tomorrow would bring new storms, literal or otherwise. But for now, he let her breathing fill the room. Each sound proof that he hadn't failed her yet. Across the city, engines roared as Celeste's convoy left for the airfield, tires slicing through puddles. Her pilot radioed weather warnings she ignored. The sky darkened, flashing once, an omen no one heeded. The same insignia she'd seen on his sleeve lingered in her mind, glowing faint in memory. Somewhere deep down she already knew she would see it again. This time not under chandeliers but under firelight. The rain that had haunted the city all night had turned the morning streets into sheets of mirrored silver. Celeste Varon stared at the reflection of her own tower in the puddles below, unsettled by a face that didn't blink back with certainty anymore. The meeting should have distracted her. Numbers, projections, contracts. But her mind kept circling back to one man and one insignia burned into her memory. "Ma'am, weather reports are worsening along the coast." Her pilot warned from the doorway. "We should postpone the flight." "Clear us for departure," she said, not looking up. "We'll beat the storm." The tone was automatic, the same voice she used to command boardrooms and bulldoze hesitation. Yet underneath it there was something else. An echo of the medic's calm from all those years ago. Her assistant hesitated at the door. "About Mr. Corrin, his employment record shows a dependent child. Medical condition." She slid a photo across the table, Elias with his daughter, smiling despite the hospital backdrop. "Would you like to proceed with—" "Just file the report," Celeste interrupted. But she didn't push the photo away. When the assistant left, she kept looking at the image. The girl's heart monitor cables were faint but visible, delicate as threads keeping her anchored to life. Celeste exhaled slowly, closing the folder. Across the city, Elias was at the kitchen sink, rinsing a single plate while Mira read from a tablet. "They're doing Career Day next week," she said brightly. "Can I tell them you're a medic?" He smiled. "You can tell them I used to be one. Now I serve people food instead of bandages." "But you still help people," she said simply, eyes fixed on him with innocent certainty that pierced deeper than pity ever could. He checked the clock. Noon already. The staffing agency hadn't called, and his phone was still silent. He turned down a job at a loading dock last night. It paid too little to cover her medication, too much time away from home. The envelope Celeste had tried to give him sat unopened in the drawer. Money earned was one thing, money offered was another. As he sorted bills, his phone finally buzzed. an unfamiliar number. He answered, wary. Corin. Mr. Corin, this is Helix Security. We manage flight safety for Varon Systems. Ms. Varon requested a consultant's contact, said you might know about emergency medical coordination. His brow furrowed. She said that? Yes, sir. The convoy leaves in 30 minutes. She asked if you'd review her team's evacuation protocol. He almost said no. He wasn't her employee anymore, but the word evacuation made his pulse shift. He remembered the warning look in the pilot's eyes last night. If she was ignoring storm advisories again, she'd need more than boardroom confidence to survive the sky. I'll review it, he said quietly. Send me the file. A pause. She insisted it be in person. By the time he reached the airfield's operations office, thunder was murmuring over the horizon. Celeste was there already, wearing the same composed face she used when signing contracts worth millions. But her eyes, those were different. Tired, calculating, conflicted. You came, she said, half surprised. You asked, he replied. I didn't expect you to accept. Neither did I. She gestured to the schematics on the table. Flight paths, emergency exits, terrain overlays. They updated the safety plan after our last talk. I wanted your opinion. He studied it in silence for a moment. You're flying into an active front, he said. If visibility drops below 400 meters, this route becomes a trap. She crossed her arms. We can handle turbulence. He looked up. This isn't turbulence. It's a weather cell with wind shear strong enough to flip a cargo jet. Her mouth tightened. Are you telling me not to go? I'm telling you. You're betting lives against ego, and the sky doesn't care who's rich. The words landed harder than he meant. For a moment she said nothing, then quietly, That's why I wanted your eyes on it. It was the first time she'd spoken to him like an equal. Not a subordinate, not a charity case, just a man who'd earned his authority the hard way. He nodded once. Ground the flight until the cell passes. 2 hours. After that, safe window opens eastward. She studied him, as if measuring the weight of trust. Finally, she gave a slow nod. 2 hours, then. Outside, rain drummed harder against the hangar's tin roof. Elias stood by the window as she stepped out to take a call, the reflection of flashing runway lights flickering across his face. He wasn't sure why he cared so much about the fate of a woman who could erase him with one call. Maybe it wasn't about her. It was about never standing by while disaster brewed again. Celeste ended her call, voice clipped. We'll delay until you give the word. She didn't meet his eyes, but the admission was there. Trust, fragile but real. For the first time, Elias saw the cracks in her armor, not weakness, but the exhaustion of someone who'd built her life on control and finally met something she couldn't control. He gathered the files and walked toward the exit, stopping once at the door. When this storm clears, he said, you'll owe your team more than a meeting. You'll owe them a flight home. She looked up, startled. And you? I'll owe my daughter breakfast, he said, and stepped out into the rain. Inside the hangar, the thunder grew louder, echoing through metal and glass like a warning, counting down its seconds. By dawn, the storm's threat had blurred into low fog across the city's skyline. Elias returned home, exhausted, boots slick with rain. Mira was still asleep, her heart monitor blinking green in the dim light. He sat beside her, rubbing warmth back into his hands as if to ground himself after the night's tension. She stirred, opening her eyes just enough to whisper, Did you find a new job? He smiled faintly. Not yet, but I talked to someone who might change that. He didn't explain further. Promises meant little until they were earned. At Varon Tower, Celeste stood before the wall of glass that framed her office like a throne room. She hadn't flown out last night. Against her habit of risk, she'd listened to him. The storm had intensified hours later, grounding all flights by federal order. If she'd gone, the outcome could have been fatal. Her assistant entered quietly. "Ms. Varon, the board is asking for an update." Celeste turned away from the skyline. "Tell them I'm reviewing operational safety personally." The assistant hesitated, then added, "There's another matter. The restaurant manager, Jonas Pell, contacted HR this morning. He's filed a formal report against that waiter. Claims insubordination." Celeste raised an eyebrow. "Insubordination?" "He says the employee defied management orders and embarrassed the club in front of investors." "File the report," she said coldly. "Under review." Her expression, however, betrayed a flicker of irritation. Jonas Pell wasn't malicious, just small. A man who confused compliance with competence. Celeste made a mental note to re-examine the club's contract later. For now, she had a call to make. Elias was brewing coffee when the call came through an unknown number. "Mr. Corrin?" "Speaking." "This is Celeste Varon." He straightened unconsciously. "Ma'am." "I'd like to meet. My office, 10 o'clock. I'm not exactly dressed for skyscrapers." "You were dressed for fire once," she replied, and ended the call. He arrived 10 minutes early, wearing the same plain jacket as the night before. Her secretary blinked at his presence but ushered him in. Celeste gestured toward a seat across from her desk. "I owe you an apology," she began. He shook his head. "No, you don't. I ignored a weather warning because I thought experience could substitute for probability. You stopped me from gambling with my team's lives." He studied her. "Then listen next time someone warns you." She allowed a small, genuine smile. "You don't mince words. I've seen what happens when people delay common sense." For a few beats, silence settled between them. Professional, tense, but no longer hostile. She slid a folder across the desk. "These are emergency response schematics for my company's facilities. I want you to audit them." He frowned. "I'm not certified anymore." "You're qualified, that's better." He hesitated, unsure whether it was trust or a test. "Why me?" "Because when everyone else froze, you didn't." The answer landed heavier than flattery. It was a statement of fact. He opened the folder. The first page outlined Varon Systems' global operations, labs, hangars, testing fields. "You're building more than software," he murmured. "I build security infrastructure," she said. "You build survival." Their eyes met, hers sharp with intellect, his steady with quiet resolve. Two worlds colliding not through hierarchy but necessity. Before leaving, he asked, "What about the report Jonas filed?" "It's under review," she said smoothly. "You'll keep your record clean." "I'm already fired." Her lips curved slightly. "Then consider this freelance, paid at my personal rate." When he stepped out of her office, the air outside felt different. Not lighter, but possible. Back at home, Mira was awake and drawing airplanes on scrap paper. "They look like yours used to," she said proudly, pointing at one sketch marked, "For Dad's Sky." He laughed softly. "You're getting the wings right. I'm naming this one Celeste," she said, grinning. He blinked, surprised. "Why that name?" "She sounds like someone who flies." Later that night, he studied the blueprints Celeste had given him. Every emergency route, every safety corridor. He marked potential flaws with a pencil, lost in focus. It felt like slipping back into the rhythm of command, not orders shouted in chaos, but quiet, deliberate control. The same kind that once saved lives. Meanwhile, Celeste stood on her balcony, phone pressed to her ear. "Delay the board meeting," she told her pilot. "Reschedule flight protocol review for tomorrow afternoon." "Ma'am, are we expecting inspection?" "Something better," she replied. "Correction." For the first time in years, she didn't end the night alone with a glass of scotch and her reflections. Instead, she printed the new report Elias had begun marking, every note, every annotation done by hand. In those lines, she saw not criticism but clarity. When the thunder rolled again hours later, it wasn't the sound of danger, it was a reminder. Storms were survivable when you listened. In a small apartment on the other side of town, Elias watched Mira sleep, her monitor light blinking in rhythm with the city's heartbeat. The sound was soft, steady, alive. He didn't know that the woman he'd humbled had just placed his notes at the center of her company's next reform. Their connection was no longer coincidence. It was momentum, the quiet gravity pulling two opposites toward the same horizon. The following afternoon broke under a slate-colored sky that promised trouble. Wind curled around the edges of the hangar as ground crews prepped the Varan Systems jet for its delayed flight. Celeste paced near the open doorway, tablet in hand, ignoring the sting of cold air. The board's impatience buzzed through her messages, 12 executives demanding her presence in person. She'd delayed once. She couldn't again. Across the tarmac, Elias stood beside a weather console, clipboard tucked under one arm. She'd asked him to review the final checklist before takeoff. He wasn't supposed to be there. His role was advisory, temporary, but she'd insisted. "You see things my team misses," she had told him that morning. Now, as gusts tore through the field, he saw too much. "Wind shear's rising," he said, raising his voice over the turbines. "You take off now, you'll hit cross currents at 600 feet. The operations manager, a man twice Elias's size and half his patience, snorted. "We've flown through worse. We've got $1 billion jet and top autopilot." "Autopilot won't matter if you're inverted before altitude," Elias shot back. Celeste turned sharply. "Enough," she said. "Let him finish his assessment." The crewman stiffened but obeyed. Elias knelt by the portable radar display, fingers gliding across the screen with a familiarity that made her pause. He wasn't fumbling, he was diagnosing. Every movement, quick, confident, belonged to someone who'd done this under pressure far greater than rain and corporate deadlines. He pointed to a pattern forming across the radar sweep. "See that arc? That's a microburst building south of the ridge. It'll push directly into your climb path." The manager frowned. "So we wait?" Elias nodded. "An hour, maybe less." Celeste folded her arms. "And if the window doesn't clear?" He looked up at her, the wind snapping at his jacket. "Then you postpone again." Her jaw tightened. Postponing again costs $7 million. Going down costs everything, he said evenly. The words weren't dramatic, just factual. That was what made them land so hard. Celeste turned away, staring across the airfield at the horizon. Gray, trembling, infinite. Behind her, Elias closed the radar unit and straightened. "I'll stay until the window passes," he said. "You shouldn't launch blind." She hesitated, torn between defiance and trust. Finally, she nodded once. "Fine, but if we wait, we use the time." They retreated to the operations lounge overlooking the runway. Glass walls vibrated with every gust outside. Celeste dropped into a chair, studying him across the table. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think risk was control. That if you owned the risk, you owned the outcome." Elias met her gaze. "And now?" "Now, I'm not sure if that's courage or arrogance." He didn't smile, but there was understanding in his eyes. Sometimes they're the same thing, until they're not. For a moment, the storm outside filled the silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, like the air before lightning. Celeste broke it first. "How's your daughter?" He blinked, surprised. "You read the file." "I read everything that touches my decisions," she said, softer than before. "I know she's on a waiting list for cardiac correction therapy." He hesitated. "She's strong. Stronger than I was at her age." "She's why you didn't take the envelope," Celeste said. He nodded. "Charity feels temporary. I need permanence." "Then consider this an investment." He gave a short laugh. "You sound like a banker trying to moralize profit." "I'm a survivor trying to pay back a debt," she replied. A lightning flash rippled beyond the window, white slicing through the gray. A low rumble followed seconds later. Elias stood, moving to the console again. Winds shifting east, microbursts collapsing. "We've got a 30-minute window." She rose too, gathering her coat. "Then we go." "You're sure?" "I've waited long enough," she said, determination cutting through fatigue. "But you're coming aboard." He stared at her. "That wasn't part of the plan." "It is now." Minutes later, the engine screamed to life. Rain smeared across the hangar lights as the jet rolled forward. Elias fastened into a jump seat behind the cockpit, headset over his ears, scanning the weather data streaming in. Celeste sat nearby, expression unreadable. "Wind shear still active at low altitude," he reported. "Tell your pilot to climb shallow 20 degrees. She relayed the instruction calmly. The pilot adjusted, acknowledging with a curt nod. The aircraft began its slow taxi toward the main strip. The first tremor hit seconds after liftoff, a sudden lurch as wind clawed at the wings. Celeste's hand gripped the armrest. Elias's voice cut through the comms. "Level pitch, adjust thrust manually, autopilot's overcompensating." The pilot obeyed, sweat beading across his temple. The jet steadied, but alarms blared briefly before silence reclaimed the cabin. They climbed past the worst of it. Celeste exhaled shakily, realizing her knuckles had gone white. When they finally leveled off above the storm, she turned to him. "You were right again." He looked out the window at the rolling clouds below. "No one's right in a storm," he said. "You just survive it." For the first time since they'd met, she smiled, not out of amusement, but out of relief. "Then maybe survival's its own kind of control." He met her eyes. "Maybe it's the only kind that matters." Below them, lightning stitched the clouds into a tapestry of fire and motion. Neither of them knew this flight would not end as smoothly as it began, but both understood in that moment that the air between them had changed. The first sign of trouble was the noise. Not thunder, something sharper, mechanical. A grinding vibration tore through the fuselage, rattling the cabin. Elias's instincts triggered before reason did. He was out of his seat, bracing against the cockpit doorway before the pilot even spoke. "Hydraulic pressure's dropping," the co-pilot shouted, fingers racing across the panel. Warning lights bled red through the dim cabin. Celeste unbuckled, gripping the back of a chair as the aircraft lurched sideways. Outside, the storm they thought they'd escaped was back, its tendrils of gray reaching higher than predicted. Elias steadied himself. "Manual control now. You've got a system bleed in the left aileron," the pilot's voice cracked. "That can't be right." "Do it," Elias barked, sharper than he'd meant, but tone saved seconds, and seconds saved lives. Celeste stared at him, at how fast his calm replaced chaos. He moved like a man who'd lived in emergencies so long that fear was just background noise. She felt the plane tilt again, gravity sliding sideways. Papers, coffee cups, pens, all went airborne. Altitude, Elias called. 8,000, dropping fast. He grabbed the emergency radio, flipping to open frequency. Mayday, Mayday, this is Varen Systems Charter. Mechanical failure. Descending through 7,000, coordinates. Static drowned him. Celeste stumbled forward, gripping the frame beside him. What can I do? Strap in, he said without looking back, and keep everyone calm. Her jaw tightened, but she obeyed. For the first time, she wasn't the one issuing orders. The engines screamed. One sputtered, the nose dipped. Elias felt the shift in his bones before the instruments confirmed it. Hydraulic loss confirmed, the co-pilot said. Backups not responding. Elias scanned the overhead systems. Kill power to the left engine. You'll glide straighter. That'll drop speed? That's the point. You're fighting drag, not gravity. The pilot hesitated only a second before following his call. The engine whined down. The vibration steadied, but altitude kept bleeding away. Celeste forced her breath to even out. How bad? Elias didn't lie. If we don't find clear ground soon, we'll have to ditch. Over what? He met her eyes. Forest. Outside the window, treetops emerged through sheets of rain. Dark, endless, rising fast. The flight crew exchanged looks that said what no one dared voice. Brace positions, Elias commanded. His voice carried that strange paradox, urgent but unshaken. He grabbed a stray oxygen mask, knotted it into a sling for a passenger's injured arm. Hold tight, heads down. The impact came like a hammer. Metal shrieked. Overhead panels exploded in sparks. The world tilted, spun, screamed, and stopped. Silence. Then the crackle of fire. Elias's ears rang, but training replaced shock. He unbuckled, kicking debris aside. Everyone sound off! A chorus of groans, coughing, fear. He scanned for Celeste. She was half-pinned under a seat frame, conscious but dazed. Don't move, he said, crouching. I can't, my leg. He jammed a support strut under the frame and levered. The metal groaned, lifted, enough to drag her free. Her right ankle was twisted, blood pooling along the fabric of her suit. Breathe. You're all right. Her voice was hoarse. You've done this before. Too many times. The co-pilot crawled toward them, clutching his shoulder. Radio's dead. We're off radar. Elias checked his watch, then the sky through the shattered fuselage. We're alive, that's step one. Fires spreading aft, everyone out. He moved through the cabin methodically, cutting straps, dragging one unconscious passenger free, then another. His hands bled, his breath burned with smoke, but he didn't slow. Celeste watched through the haze, stunned at how command seemed to orbit him. People obeyed him without question. The very thing power usually demanded from her, he earned through instinct. When the last passenger stumbled into the clearing, Elias returned for the emergency kit. Flames bit along the walls. He grabbed a defibrillator, flares, and oxygen packs before the heat became unbearable. Outside, rain hissed against smoldering wreckage. The smell of burning fuel clawed the air. Celeste leaned against a fallen branch, face pale, ankle swollen. We won't last long out here, she murmured. He dropped beside her, already checking her pulse. Long enough for rescue. Rescue doesn't know where we are. They'll find the smoke. He turned to the crew. Move everyone at least 30 meters from the fuselage. Group by injury. Keep them awake. Celeste caught his wrist as he stood. Elias? She said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken his name with something that sounded like faith. You saved us. He looked down at her, soaked in rain and soot. Not yet, he said. Saving means getting everyone home. Lightning flashed again. revealing the chaos around them. The wreckage scattered across the clearing like broken wings, the silhouettes of people huddled together in the downpour. Radio fragments might still work, Elias said. I'll improvise an antenna. You, stay off that leg. She almost laughed despite the pain. You give orders like you outrank me. He met her gaze. Out here, nobody ranks anybody. He found a strip of metal from the tail section and began rigging the damaged radio, rainwater streaking his face. Every few minutes, he glanced back at the group, at Celeste, trying to comfort a frightened passenger despite her own injuries. For the first time, she looked less like a CEO and more like someone human, someone surviving beside everyone else. When static finally gave way to a faint response, copy, signal, faint, hold position. Elias's shoulders dropped in relief. He turned toward the survivors. Rescue's on the way, he called. A wave of trembling exhalations swept through the group. Celeste met his eyes across the wreckage. In her gaze, there was no power, no distance, only understanding. The rain poured harder, extinguishing the last flames. Under the roar of the storm, he could still hear her voice from earlier, quiet but certain. You've done this before. Yes, he thought, and this time it mattered more. The rain had eased to a mist by the time dawn touched the forest clearing. Smoke drifted upward in thin gray ribbons, marking the wreckage from miles away. Elias crouched beside the improvised antenna, testing the radio again. The signal was faint but alive. Rescue teams were triangulating their position. He should have felt relief, but it hadn't settled in yet. Experience had taught him that survival didn't end when the crash did. It began there. Celeste stirred against the fallen tree he'd propped her against. Her ankle was swollen, but her pulse was steady. He moved to check her bandage, tightening it with deliberate care. How's the pain? She winced. Manageable. You've done this before. He nodded. It's all muscle memory after a while. She studied him. You talk like you've seen 100 crashes. I've seen enough to know luck has a sense of humor, he replied, glancing toward the scorched fuselage. The survivors huddled near a patch of shelter Elias had constructed from the plane's insulation panels. 2 crew members kept an injured passenger stable, using oxygen packs he'd salvaged. They followed his orders without hesitation. Every movement he made radiated assurance, not the kind born of arrogance but earned discipline. Celeste watched him with a strange, quiet admiration she wasn't ready to admit. The co-pilot approached. We're low on thermal blankets, temperatures dropping. Elias looked at the tree line. There's dry brush about 50 meters east. We'll start a controlled fire for warmth. Celeste frowned. Isn't that dangerous, the fuel? Winds change direction, he said. Smoke will rise clean. If we don't stay warm, hypothermia does the rest. She said nothing more. It wasn't defiance keeping her silent. It was trust, though she didn't name it yet. Hours passed. Rain gave way to sunlight, breaking through a torn sky, and steam rose off the wreckage like ghosts departing. Elias returned from the tree line carrying branches. He set them carefully near the fire pit, hand steady, deliberate. When he looked up, Celeste was watching him again. You should rest, he said. I can't, she murmured. My mind keeps replaying it, the fall, the noise. I've flown thousands of hours and I've never felt powerless before. He crouched across from her. That's what survival feels like. You do everything right and still end up at gravity's mercy. She held his gaze. You're not rattled. I've been rattled before, he said softly. I learned to hide it. She turned her head, studying him as if the answer to his calm was written somewhere on his face. Why did you keep helping? You could have saved yourself first. He shrugged. Because my daughter wouldn't forgive me if I didn't. Her expression softened. Mira, she's the one in the hospital. He nodded. Yeah, she thinks I work nights because it's quieter. Celeste's lips curved faintly. Maybe she's not wrong. The wind shifted again, carrying a low hum. Distant, mechanical. Elias froze, listening. Helicopter blades. The sound grew louder, echoing between the hills. Celeste's eyes widened. Is that? He raised a hand. Don't move. Let them circle once. He grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit and waited until the second pass. Then, with practiced precision, he fired. The orange plume cut through the pale morning like a comet. Moments later, voices crackled over the radio. Rescue inbound, visual confirmed. Hold position. Relief rippled through the survivors. Some cried, some laughed, some simply stared at the sky. Celeste's shoulders sagged, exhaustion finally claiming her. Elias moved to her side as she whispered, You really did save us. He shook his head. You helped, too. She gave a tired laugh. By what? Panicking elegantly? By staying human, he said. That matters more than people think. The chopper's downdraft flattened the grass as medics descended. The noise drowned out everything, yet somehow, in that chaos, Celeste kept her eyes on him. She wanted to speak, to tell him something before they separated, but the words stayed trapped behind the roar. Hours later, the survivors were flown to a coastal hospital. Elias sat in the corner of a triage tent, oxygen mask hanging loose around his neck. His hands were blistered, his throat raw from smoke. But when a nurse told him his vitals were stable, he only asked, The others? All accounted for, she said. No fatalities. Whoever led your field response, he saved you all. He smiled faintly. Guess I owe him dinner. When Celeste was wheeled in on a stretcher nearby, she spotted him instantly. You look like hell, she said through the haze of painkillers. He managed a grin. You should see the plane. Her laugh was small but real. You're impossible. Alive, he corrected. Just alive. That night, as the hospital quieted, Celeste drafted a statement for the media. Mechanical failure averted by decisive action of Flight Medic Elias Corrin, it read. For the first time in her life, she didn't delegate credit, she gave it freely. Outside her room, Elias stood at the window, watching rescue helicopters fade into the horizon. For once, he didn't feel like the invisible man behind survival. The world would know his name again. Not because he sought recognition, but because the truth refused to stay buried. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, a little girl's monitor blinked green, steady, strong, waiting for her father to come home. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of monitors and the occasional crackle of rain against the window. Celeste sat upright in her bed, leg immobilized, laptop open on her knees. Headlines filled the screen. Waiter saves billionaire CEO after jet crash. Beneath it, a grainy photo of Elias guiding passengers through wreckage, flames licking the background. She read every word twice, though she already knew the story better than the reporters ever could. A knock broke the silence. You're supposed to rest, came a familiar voice. Elias stood in the doorway, arm in a sling, expression dry but gentle. Didn't think I'd need to rescue you from spreadsheets, too. She closed the laptop, a faint smile ghosting her lips. You think I'll stop working just because a plane tried to kill me? He stepped closer, pulling a chair beside her bed. I think you'll try to control gravity next. I've already filed the patent, she replied softly. For a moment, they simply sat there. Two people who'd been through chaos and somehow ended up breathing the same calm air. She gestured toward the sling. Sprain? Hairline fracture, nothing major. You make it sound routine. For some of us, it is. She looked down at her hands. The doctors said you kept that radio alive with scrap metal. I've worked with less, he said. Her voice lowered. They also said if you hadn't cut power when you did, we'd have hit the ridge. He didn't answer. Silence said enough. Celeste turned to him. You're a single father. You risked your life for people who could have replaced you with a line item. He exhaled. I didn't see CEOs or employees, just people who needed to go home. Something in that answer disarmed her. You remind me of what this company was supposed to mean before it became a machine. He met her gaze. Machines can still be fixed. The door opened briefly, her assistant, tentative, holding a folder. Ms. Varon, media's requesting a statement. They want your comment on Mr. Corrin's actions. Celeste took the folder, glancing at the draft press release. The words were polished, safe, corporate. She tore the top page in half and handed it back. We'll write a new one. Her assistant blinked. What should it say? The truth. When the door closed again, Elias frowned. You don't have to put my name in headlines. She shook her head. No, I do. People need to see what it looks like when someone ordinary does something extraordinary and expects nothing back. He hesitated. You're painting me like a story. Maybe, she said, smiling faintly. But some stories fix reputations, others fix people. Later that day, the press flooded the lobby. Reporters shouted questions through the glass as cameras flashed. Celeste, on crutches, stepped forward beside Elias. She faced the crowd with the same composure she once wielded to dominate boardrooms, but this time her voice carried something new. Humility. Yesterday's events reminded me that leadership isn't about control or profit, she said. It's about responsibility. The man beside me, Elias Corrin, reminded me of that when he chose courage over survival. The words struck harder than any statement of wealth ever could. The room quieted. Flashes stilled. For the first time, the story wasn't about scandal. It was about redemption. After the briefing, as they waited for the elevator, she looked at him. You're not disappearing after this, are you? He chuckled. I'm not built for cameras. You're built for something better, she said. I'm starting a new foundation. Emergency medical grants for veterans and their families. It'll need a director. He blinked. You're serious? I don't joke about saving lives. He leaned back slightly, studying her. You're offering me a job out of guilt? I'm offering it because I've seen what competence looks like. It doesn't wear suits, it wears scars. He didn't answer right away. Somewhere down the corridor a child laughed, and he thought of Mira's heart monitor blinking in rhythm with that sound. If I accept, he said slowly, we do it my way. Real training, real funding, no PR fronts. Celeste nodded. Deal. By evening, his phone buzzed with a new message. Hospital clearance confirmed for travel. He looked at Celeste through the glass partition of her room, already surrounded by advisors, journalists, and nurses. For a second, she glanced up and caught his eyes. No words passed between them, just acknowledgement. A silent understanding forged in smoke and rain. Outside, cameras still flashed, but neither of them turned toward the noise. The world could have its headlines. They had something truer, a second chance built from disaster. As Elias stepped into the hall, he paused, hearing the faint voice of a reporter repeating the title that would circle every outlet by morning. From waiter to hero, the man who saved Varon. Systems. He smiled, shaking his head. Titles didn't matter. What mattered was that somewhere across the city, a little girl would soon wake up to news she could be proud of. Not about her father's job, but about who he still was. In the quiet that followed, Celeste's words lingered like an echo of promise. Some stories fix people. This one already had. The following week brought a calm neither of them trusted. Elias stood at the hospital's front entrance, bag slung over his shoulder, watching the rain dissolve into sunlight. For the first time in months, he wasn't rushing anywhere. Mira had been discharged that morning, her condition stable, her laughter echoing through their small apartment like a promise kept. Yet, even now, a strange restlessness stirred in him, the feeling that peace was only temporary. He didn't have long to wonder. A black sedan rolled up the drive, sleek as shadow. The window lowered to reveal Celeste's driver. "Miss Varon requests your presence at headquarters. She said you'd know why." He did. An hour later, he entered the marble lobby of Varon Systems, its towering ceilings and glass walls catching the city's light like a cathedral for commerce. It was nothing like the chaos of the forest or the heat of the wreckage, yet he felt the same pressure in his chest. This place had built her power. Now it would test what she'd learned from losing it. Celeste met him outside the executive boardroom, walking carefully on her healing leg. "You look better than I expected," she said. "You look busier than you should," he replied. "I'm reintroducing the company to humility. It's taking longer than I thought." He smirked. "That's a big ask for people who think they own the weather." She tilted her head. "Maybe that's why I wanted you here." Inside the boardroom, a dozen executives sat around a gleaming table. Screens glowed with spreadsheets and damage assessments from the crash investigation. One man stood as they entered. "Ms. Varon, the press has turned this into a human interest circus. We suggest settling with non-disclosure clauses to contain the narrative." Elias stayed quiet, but Celeste's expression sharpened. "Contain the narrative?" she repeated. "That narrative saved all of you from headlines about negligence. You should be thanking it." The man bristled. "We're not in the business of sentiment." She leaned forward, her tone glacial. "Then consider this a new business model." She gestured to Elias. "This is Mr. Corrin, the man you've read about but haven't bothered to meet. He's alive because he didn't wait for policy approval to act." Some of the executives exchanged looks. One woman said politely, "And his relevance to this meeting?" "He's here," Celeste said, "because he's building something we're funding. The Mira Initiative, veteran-led rapid response and crisis medical training." Murmurs filled the room. "You're diverting corporate capital?" "I'm investing corporate conscience," she replied, "and Mr. Corrin will oversee it." The objections came fast. Budget, optics, shareholders. But Celeste didn't flinch. "You've spent years measuring worth by quarterly margins. I nearly died because of that mindset. This company will stand for something more tangible than profit." Elias watched, silent but steady, as her authority reshaped the space. She wasn't defending him, she was redefining herself. When the meeting adjourned, she turned to him in the hallway. "Still think I'm offering this out of guilt?" He gave a quiet smile. "No, I think you're offering it because you finally believe in what you can't control." She exhaled, something between a sigh and a laugh. "You really are infuriating. And you're really terrible at resting." They walked to her office overlooking the city. She poured 2 coffees, hers black, his with milk from the tiny fridge. "The Mira Initiative launches in 4 weeks, she said. "Facilities are being converted near the coast. Training will start immediately. You'll have full authority over field operations." "I don't work for authority," he said. "You'll work with it. There's a difference." He looked out at the skyline, glass, steel, ambition. "And when the next disaster hits? Then we'll already be ready," she said. A knock interrupted them. Her assistant entered holding a folder. "Donation agreements for the initiative, ma'am." Celeste took it, scanned the pages, and handed it to Elias. "You should sign these too. It's your name now." He skimmed the document. The Mira Initiative, a partnership between Varen Systems and Elias Corrin. The words made him pause. "You didn't have to name it after her." "I did," Celeste said softly, "because she's why you said yes." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, sunlight cut through the clouds, striking the tower's mirrored surface like a second sunrise. Later that afternoon, as Elias toured the new facility under construction, workers paused to greet him with quiet respect. He didn't feel like a hero, just a man trying to make use of his scars. Every table he passed, every blueprint he marked, built something larger than survival. That evening, Celeste arrived unexpectedly, her limp barely noticeable now. She found him standing near a wall where a mural in progress depicted an abstract flame, rising, curling, unbroken. "You approve?" she asked. He nodded. "It's fitting. Fire didn't end us, it started this." She studied him for a long moment. "When I look at you, I remember that not every rescue happens in the air. Some happen when someone makes you face what you've become." He glanced at her. "That's mutual." Her phone buzzed. Another board alert, another demand for attention. She silenced it without looking. "You realize, this program will make enemies," she said. "People don't like being reminded they're replaceable." "Then we'll remind them of something else," he replied. "That worth isn't measured by title or net worth. It's what you do when everything burns." Celeste nodded slowly, the reflection of the mural's flame dancing across her eyes. "Then let's make sure the world remembers that." That night, long after she left, Elias walked through the half-lit facility one more time. Tools lay on benches, walls unfinished, air smelling of paint and possibility. He paused beside the plaque that would hang by the entrance, the inscription already engraved, "Founded in honor of courage that refused to stay silent." He touched the cool metal and smiled. For the first time in years, he wasn't rebuilding his life alone. He was building something that might outlive him. Behind him, the lights dimmed, leaving only the mural's glow, like a promise still being written. The official launch of the Mira Initiative arrived under a sky washed clean by rain. Rows of chairs filled the courtyard of the new coastal facility. Reporters, veterans, engineers, and families gathered under a banner that read, "Preparedness is humanity's greatest invention." Elias stood behind the podium, suit pressed but plain, no medals, no stage persona. Celeste stood a few steps back, a walking cane tucked discreetly behind her leg, expression composed yet watchful. He wasn't a man who liked speeches. Words to him were like emergency codes, meant to be brief, clear, and useful. But this wasn't just his moment, it was Mira's too. "When people call you a hero," he began, "they usually mean you survived doing what they couldn't imagine doing themselves. But survival isn't about bravery, it's about responsibility, about deciding who gets to go home when everything falls apart." The crowd quieted, phones lifted, cameras catching every syllable. "I didn't build this place to celebrate survival," he continued. "I built it so fewer people have to call it a miracle." When the applause came, it was polite but real. Celeste approached the microphone next, her tone confident but softened by something rare, gratitude. We named this initiative after a child who represents the reason behind every decision that matters, she said, because sometimes it takes someone small to remind the powerful why power exists. Mira sat in the front row, tiny hands clutching a program pamphlet almost bigger than her. When the cameras turned toward her, she smiled shyly and waved. Celeste's voice wavered for half a beat, but she caught herself. Today, we're redefining what strength looks like. And for once, it looks exactly like this. After the ceremony, the crowd scattered into clusters of conversation. Elias guided Mira through the corridors, polished halls lined with emergency drones, field kits, and training simulators. "You'll be running this place one day," he teased. "I can't," she said seriously. "You didn't teach me how to fly yet." He chuckled. "Then that's next on the list." Behind them, Celeste was cornered by board members eager to claim the initiative's success. One executive said, "Excellent optics, Ms. Varon. The press is calling it the most human thing a corporation has done this decade." Celeste's smile was thin. "Then maybe we should do it more often." Her gaze drifted toward Elias, who knelt beside his daughter as she tested a flight drone. That image, humility made visible, felt more valuable than any quarterly report. Later that evening, when the crowds were gone and the courtyard was empty, Celeste found him overlooking the ocean from the balcony. The sky had deepened into violet, waves whispering against the shore. "You spoke like someone who's been doing this his whole life," she said. "I've been doing the part without applause," he replied. This was new. "You're better at it than you think." He glanced at her cane. "You're healing faster than the doctors predicted." "I'm stubborn," she said, "and I've had practice pretending pain doesn't exist." He gave her a knowing look. "That's not something to be proud of." "It is when you need it to survive," she countered. Then, quieter, "But maybe surviving isn't the point anymore." He leaned on the railing. "You ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't met?" "Every day," she said, "and every day I'm glad I don't have to imagine it anymore." Their silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that existed between people who'd already spoken their truths in action. The storm had stripped them both bare, and what remained was something steadier, earned trust. As the evening deepened, a security aide hurried onto the balcony, holding a tablet. "Miss Varon, urgent message. The Aviation Division's test prototype, one of the new hybrid crafts, lost remote communication mid-flight." Her posture stiffened instantly. "Location? Mountain sector north of the ridge. We've dispatched recovery teams, but the weather—" Elias interrupted, eyes narrowing. "That's the same ridge we crossed before the crash." The aide nodded. "Yes, sir." Celeste turned to Elias, the old tension returning. "If they've lost comms, we could be facing another systems failure." He grabbed his jacket. "Then we go." "You're not certified for corporate deployment," she reminded him. He met her eyes. "I wasn't certified for saving your life either." Minutes later, the emergency helipad thundered alive. The crew scrambled as the rotor wash churned the sea spray into mist. Celeste climbed aboard despite protests from her medical aide. Elias took the co-pilot seat, headset clamped tight, scanning incoming telemetry from the damaged aircraft. "Altitude data's stalling," he muttered. "If it's losing pressure, they'll drift southeast, right over the ravine." Celeste steadied herself against the turbulence. "We'll never make visual before dark." He flipped a switch, recalibrating infrared filters. "We don't need visual, we need signal." Through the static, a faint distress ping flickered on the radar. He zoomed in, tracking its pulse through the canyon. "There." Celeste gripped the overhead rail. "Tell the pilot to hover. We'll deploy the drones." He hesitated. No time. The craft's losing altitude fast. If it hits the water, they're gone. Without waiting for protocol, he unstrapped his harness and moved to the side hatch. Celeste's voice rose over the comms, half fury, half fear. "Elias, don't you dare!" He turned, smiling faintly. "I told you, I don't wait for permission." Then he jumped. The wind swallowed him whole, his silhouette slicing through rain and rotor wash. The rescue tether yanked taut as he descended toward the falling aircraft below, a streak of red metal against the storm's gray maw. Celeste's breath caught, every nerve in her body frozen between horror and awe. "Deploy recovery line," she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. The crew moved, the winch screamed, and somewhere between sky and ocean a single man reached for the machine plummeting toward oblivion, unarmed, unafraid, unstoppable. Celeste closed her eyes briefly, whispering words she didn't mean to speak aloud. "If you survive this, I swear I'll never doubt you again." Below, lightning flared, illuminating two outlines suspended over the storm's edge. One descending, one falling, both defying gravity in their own way. Rain blurred the searchlights streaking across the windshield of the rescue chopper as Celeste leaned forward, headset pressed to her ear. "Status!" she shouted over the roar of the storm. "Visual contact lost," the pilot yelled back. "Telemetry's unstable, wind shears throwing interference." Below them, the ocean looked like shattered glass, white foam clawing at black water. Every few seconds, lightning revealed a glimpse of metal wreckage tumbling through the air. But Elias was somewhere in that storm, tethered to a dying machine, and she couldn't lose him. Not again. She gripped the comms. "Reel the line, slowly, he's not done." The winch screamed, cables whipping in the wind. Then a faint voice broke through static. "Still got one alive, hold position." Celeste's heart stopped. Elias. His voice was faint, strained, but alive. "Elias, confirm," she said, leaning into the mic. "2 crewmen. Conscious but injured. We're—" His words cut out, replaced by thunder. Then the cable jerked violently. The crew scrambled to stabilize it as weight suddenly doubled on the line. "Brace the anchor," Celeste ordered. The pilot fought to keep the chopper steady as turbulence hammered them from all sides. The winch creaked, straining. Through the storm's chaos, a red light flared below, the emergency beacon Elias carried. For one heartbeat, she saw them, 3 figures swaying mid-air, lightning outlining their silhouettes. Then the tether snapped. The sound was a gunshot against the sky. Celeste's scream was swallowed by rotor noise as the cable recoiled upward. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. But then the radar pinged again, a faint bouncing signal from below, not gone, just descending fast. "He's got an emergency chute," the co-pilot shouted. "Deploying over the East Ridge." Celeste's chest constricted. "Bring us around." They circled low, searchlights cutting through mist until they caught sight of the orange flare flickering between broken trees. The pilot hovered. "That's him." Celeste didn't wait for protocol. She clipped herself to a second line and descended halfway before the crew could stop her. Wind tore at her hair, rain biting her face as she shouted, "Elias, answer me!" A voice came from below, hoarse but steady. "You never listen, do you?" She almost laughed through her tears. "You jumped out of a helicopter again." "And you followed," he said, looking up with that same impossible calm. He was kneeling beside the downed aircraft's crew, one unconscious, one awake and coughing. The wreck had lodged between 2 cliffs, smoke rising from its bent fuselage. He'd used his chute cords to anchor the survivors against the slope. Blood streaked his sleeve, his sling long gone. "Both alive," he said. but not for long if we don't stabilize that fuel line. Celeste landed beside him, knee-deep in mud. Tell me what to do. He met her gaze, lightning flashing behind them. Clamp that valve, tight. When it clicks, move clear. She obeyed without hesitation. The hiss of leaking fuel stopped, the storm filling the silence that followed. For a moment, neither spoke. They just breathed. Two people who'd already beaten death once, doing it again out of stubbornness. Rescue teams arrived minutes later, ropes descending, voices calling through the rain. But Celeste stayed beside him until the last survivor was lifted away. When it was finally their turn, she touched his arm. You're bleeding. He smiled faintly. Just proof I was here. They rose together into the waiting storm, rain cascading off their harnesses as the floodlights swallowed the darkness below. Inside the helicopter, paramedics moved quickly. Bandages, oxygen masks, rapid vitals. Celeste sat opposite him, soaked, shaking, but alive. He tried to speak. She silenced him with a look that said, "Don't you dare make this sound routine." Back at the coastal facility, chaos awaited. Emergency personnel, cameras, reporters swarming the pad. When they stepped out, flashbulbs erupted. The world already knew. The second Varan flight had nearly met, the same fate as the first, and the same man had saved them. Celeste faced the microphones, ignoring her staff's frantic gestures. Her voice carried through the storm's dying wind. "There's your statement," she said. "Our systems failed again, but human instinct didn't. He saved them again." Elias shifted, uncomfortable under the lights. "It wasn't just me." She turned to him, eyes fierce and shining. "It was you. You jumped from the sky, Elias. Twice. Maybe the world should start taking notes." The crowd erupted with questions, but she didn't stay to answer. She took his arm, guiding him past reporters into the building. Inside, silence reclaimed them. The air smelled of rain and antiseptic. Celeste leaned against the wall, exhaustion softening her edges. "You keep doing this," she said quietly, "running toward fire when everyone else runs away." He shrugged. "That's just habit." "No," she said, "that's who you are." He looked at her, every scar and shadow catching the light. "You'd have done the same." She smiled, tired but genuine. "Not before I met you." Outside, the storm finally broke into calm. The horizon glowed faintly, dawn trying to break through what remained of night. Celeste glanced at it, then back at him. "When this is over," she said, "I'm grounding you." He chuckled softly. "You could try." Their laughter carried faintly down the hall. Two people who had seen death twice and found, somehow, that life was still waiting for them. The storm had taken everything except the one thing neither could control, each other. The sea was calm again, eerily calm, as if the world itself were holding its breath after everything it had witnessed. Morning light spilled across the coastal cliffs, catching the silver sheen of the Mira Initiative's new emblem. Below it, the courtyard buzzed with quiet movement. Rescue technicians, engineers, volunteers, all working as if purpose itself had weight. Elias stood on the balcony overlooking it all, his arm still bandaged, uniform jacket hanging loose. He watched the horizon without really seeing it, mind tracing the past weeks like a map of scars. Somewhere in the hospital wing below, two rescued pilots were recovering. They'd live. That was enough. Behind him, footsteps clicked softly. "You should be resting," Celeste said. She'd traded her cane for a subtle brace, her posture more balanced now. The wind teased her hair across her face, but she didn't seem to care. "I did," he said, "for 10 minutes. That's almost a record." She came to stand beside him, hands on the railing. The board wanted to cancel this morning's address. PR fatigue, they called it. Let them, he said. They've already had their turn talking. Maybe it's time they started listening. Celeste smiled faintly. You always make simplicity sound like rebellion. That's because it usually is. Below, workers assembled an impromptu memorial, a curved wall of engraved names. The first plaque read, "Dedicated to every life saved not by power but by courage." Celeste stared at it in silence. You know, the media's calling you the man who made billionaires believe in conscience. He chuckled. Then the media's getting creative. They're also asking what you'll do next. He turned toward her. What do you think I should do? Her answer came slowly. Stay. Not because I owe you anything, but because I don't. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but only if we finish this together. Finish? She asked. Every system fails eventually, he said, but people don't have to. Not if we teach them how to act before the fear takes over. That was how it began, the next step. Within weeks, the Mira Initiative wasn't just a center. It became a network, connecting medics, engineers, and responders across the coast. The wreck that nearly killed them turned into a model for training. The cliff where Elias had landed became a designated simulation zone, and on its highest point, they built something new, a small observation deck with a plaque that simply read, "The sky can fall, will still rise." Celeste insisted on being there for its dedication, even if her doctors protested. If the sky falls again, she said wryly, I'm not missing the view this time. Elias laughed, adjusting her seat beside the railing. You're impossible. Good, she replied. That means we'll get along. When the ceremony began, there were no speeches, no reporters, no polished remarks. Just a few dozen people standing in the wind, looking out at the horizon. Elias read a single line from Mira's old drawing notebook, one she'd given him weeks earlier, the page smudged with pencil and hope. It said, "When things fall, they don't always break. Sometimes they land in better hands." Celeste closed her eyes as he read it, the words settling over everyone like sunlight. For a long moment, there was nothing but the crash of waves and the sound of hearts remembering what mattered. Afterward, as the crowd drifted away, Celeste stayed seated. You know, she said quietly, I used to think legacy was about what people built after you were gone. He tilted his head, and now I think it's about who still believes because you stayed. He nodded, the wind brushing his face. Mira said something similar once. She said I fix things because I'm scared of losing them. Then she's smarter than both of us, Celeste said. They sat in silence, two survivors of different worlds finally belonging to the same one. The horizon burned gold, and the sea below reflected it like molten glass. Celeste, Elias said after a while, you ever wonder what comes next? She smiled, eyes fixed on the endless blue. Always, but for once, I'm not afraid to find out. As the sun dipped lower, its last light caught the memorial wall, the engraved words shimmering briefly before the shadows claimed them. It looked like something alive, like every story that refused to fade. Later, when they left the deck, Celeste glanced back once. You know, if you hadn't spilled that wine, he laughed, you'd have fired me. Probably, she admitted, and we'd have missed the best disaster of our lives. He held the door open for her. Some things are worth the fall. Agreed, she said, and together they stepped inside, leaving the sound of waves behind but carrying their rhythm with them. The Mira Initiative's beacon lit up one last time as night fell, a pulse of soft blue against the darkness. Somewhere in the city, Mira was asleep, dreaming of skies that no longer scared her. And for once, the world felt like it had learned something from the storm. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Title: Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?